News of the New Haven incident spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Within hours, every major civilization had received detailed reports of how the Vorthon Empire's mighty fleet had been defeated by what appeared to be converted cruise ships and agricultural vessels. The report seemed impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. The humans had not only fought back, but had done so with a level of coordination and technological sophistication that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about them. In the emergency session of the Galactic Council, Ambassador Jake Miller stood before a very different audience than the one that had witnessed the Vorthon declaration of war just days earlier. The confident representatives who had watched Zethkar announce humanity's doom now sat in nervous silence, their various forms of eyes fixed on the human diplomat, who no longer seemed quite so harmless. "The crystalline hegemony wishes to formally address recent events," declared Speaker Silthara, her crystalline form flickering with patterns that indicated extreme agitation. "Our historical databases have been updated with information that was previously classified. We find ourselves compelled to remind the Council that humanity's military history is more extensive than recent records suggest." "The Aquatic Federation concurs," bubbled Admiral Glurith, his water-filled chamber showing signs of rapid circulation that indicated stress. "Our deep archives, those sealed since the Great Peace, contain records of human military capabilities that we had chosen to forget. The Battle of Titan, the Siege of Alpha Centauri, the complete destruction of the Calyx Armada." Jake nodded solemnly, his earlier amusement replaced by something much more serious. "The Battle of the Asteroid Fields. My great-great-grandfather was there. The miners were so irritated at having their work interrupted that they turned the entire belt into the galaxy's largest minefield. It took the enemy fleet 3 months to realize they were trapped in a kill zone made of rocks, mining charges, and pure human stubbornness. The Methane Republic's representative, a being of shifting gases contained within a specialized atmospheric suit, spoke in a voice like wind through caves. "Our records indicate that humanity once defeated the ethereal collective using nothing but philosophical arguments. The Melancholy Wars," Jake confirmed. "We sent them increasingly depressing literature until they decided that conquering the galaxy wasn't worth the existential dread. They actually chose to retreat to their home dimension rather than continue reading human poetry about the meaninglessness of existence. The hive mind collective, their 1,000 voices speaking as one, trembled with something that might have been fear. Query: how did the galaxy collectively forget these events? Analysis suggests deliberate information suppression." Jake's expression grew thoughtful. "Because we wanted you to forget. After the last Great War ended, humanity made a conscious decision. We were too good at violence, too creative with destruction, too effective at turning everyday objects into weapons of mass annihilation. We realized that we posed a threat not just to our enemies, but to ourselves and everyone else in the galaxy." He gestured to a holographic display that showed peaceful human colonies across the galaxy. "So we chose to become something else. We dismantled our military, converted our weapons factories into schools and hospitals, and dedicated ourselves to building instead of destroying. We taught our children to paint instead of fight, to grow food instead of making bombs, to write poetry instead of composing battle hymns." "But you never actually forgot how to fight," observed the Silicon Collective's representative, a being made of living rock whose voice sounded like grinding stone. "You can't really forget something like that," Jake replied. "You can choose not to use it. You can bury it deep in your memory. You can spend centuries learning to be something better. But when someone threatens everything you've built, when someone declares war on your children and your future, those old skills have a way of coming back." Ambassador Zethkar, who had remained silent throughout the session, finally spoke. His voice was smaller than it had been during his declaration of war, lacking the confidence that had once made him seem so threatening. "How many ships does humanity actually possess?" Jake considered the question for a long moment. "Every ship in human space is potentially a warship. Every cargo hauler can be converted to carry weapons. Every passenger liner can become a troop transport. Every research vessel can serve as a scout or communications relay. We built our civilian infrastructure to be adaptable because we learned long ago that the difference between peace and war is often just a matter of perspective." "Estimated total military potential?" "Pressed Zethkar, unknown," Jake admitted. We stopped counting after the first 100 million vessels reported ready for conversion. And that was just in the first 12 hours after your declaration. A collective shudder ran through the assembled delegates. The Galactic Council chamber had seen many threats over the millennia, but never anything quite like this. Other species had large militaries or powerful weapons, but humanity seemed to have turned their entire civilization into a sleeping weapons system. The most troubling aspect, continued Silthara, is the speed of mobilization. Our analysis suggests that human civilian populations achieved military readiness faster than most standing armies could deploy. That's because we never stopped training, Jake explained. What you saw as children playing games were actually tactical exercises. What looked like educational programming was military coordination drills. What seemed like peaceful hobbies were actually weapons training disguised as art and agriculture. The Silicon Collective's representative made a sound like rocks grinding together. Clarification requested. Are you saying that human children are taught military tactics as part of their basic education? Not directly, Jake said with a slight smile. We teach them strategy through board games, logistics through organizing school events, teamwork through sports, leadership through group projects. They learn chemistry through cooking, physics through building toys, engineering through science fairs. By the time they reach adulthood, every human has the basic knowledge needed to contribute to a military effort, even if they've never thought of it in those terms. The neural implants, whispered Admiral Glurith. We thought they were for communication and entertainment. They are, Jake confirmed. But they also serve as coordination devices. Every human can be connected to every other human in an instant, creating a communication network that spans the galaxy. In peacetime, we use it to share art and knowledge. In wartime, it becomes a military coordination system that can organize millions of people as if they were a single organism. The Hive Mind Collective found this particularly disturbing. Comparison noted, human coordination network exceeds efficiency of natural hive consciousness. Query, how is individual identity maintained? Practice, Jake replied simply. We've learned to be individuals when we want to be, and a collective when we need to be. It's just another skill, like learning to speak different languages or play musical instruments. Reports were flowing in from across the galaxy as they spoke. Human civilian ships were appearing in every major star system, revealing capabilities that made the most advanced military vessels look primitive. Ancient defense platforms that had been disguised as space stations were coming online. Mining operations were demonstrating that their equipment could crack planets as easily as asteroids. Most disturbing of all were the reports from Vorthan space itself. Human tourists and traders who had been visiting Vorthan worlds for decades were revealing themselves to be intelligence operatives who knew more about Vorthan military capabilities than the Vorthan military knew about itself. How long have you been watching us? Sethkar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We've been watching everyone, Jake replied matter-of-factly. Not out of malice, but out of necessity. When you're responsible for keeping the peace, you need to know what everyone is capable of. Every human trader, tourist, teacher, and diplomat has been gathering information and sending it back to our archives. We know the location of every military installation, the specifications of every weapon system, the names and psychological profiles of every military commander in the galaxy. The Vorthan Empire formally requests immediate cessation of hostilities, Zethkar said quickly. I'm afraid that's not how this works. Jake replied, his tone becoming cold for the first time. You see, there's something else the galaxy seems to have forgotten about humans. We're really good at holding grudges, and you didn't just declare war on humanity, Ambassador. You threatened our children, our families, our future. That's not something we forget or forgive easily. The holographic displays around the chamber lit up with tactical assessments from across the galaxy. Human forces were not just defending their own space, but were moving into position to strike at Vorthan installations. The speed and coordination of the deployment was terrifying in its efficiency. What do you want? Zethkar asked desperately. Jake's smile returned, but it was not a pleasant expression. We want the galaxy to remember why we chose peace in the first place. We want every species to understand that our 3,000 years of non-violence was a gift we gave to everyone, including ourselves. The Vorthan fleet approached the human colony of New Haven like a pack of predators closing in on what they believed was helpless prey. Fleet Commander Vrakthos stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the peaceful planet grow larger on his screens. Intelligence reports had described New Haven as a typical human settlement. Farmers, artists, teachers, and philosophers protected by nothing more than a small police force and a handful of outdated patrol vessels. "This will be easier than conquering a nursery," Vrakthos told his officers, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. "One demonstration of Vorthon military might, and the humans will surrender their entire species rather than watch their precious civilians die." What he found when his fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel was not what any of them had expected. Instead of civilian ships fleeing in panic or hiding behind their planet's weak defenses, every human vessel in the system had arranged itself in perfect military formation. Cargo haulers that should have been carrying grain and manufactured goods had somehow sprouted weapon platforms. Passenger liners meant for luxury travel bristled with missile pods and energy cannons. Even the agricultural vessels that tended the orbital farms had transformed into bristling fortresses. "This must be some sort of mistake," Vrakthos muttered, staring at his tactical display. "These are civilian craft." "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from what appears to be a converted cruise ship." "Put it through," Vrakthos commanded, expecting to hear terrified pleas for mercy. Instead, a calm voice filled the bridge. "This is Captain Paul Wright of the New Haven Defense Force. You have 30 seconds to withdraw from human space before we demonstrate why our ancestors were considered the galaxy's apex predators." Vrakthos looked at his display again, focusing on the ship the transmission was coming from. It had been a luxury liner just hours ago, designed to carry wealthy tourists on pleasant cruises between star systems. Now it looked like something from a nightmare. Its elegant curves replaced by angular weapon arrays and armor plating that seemed to have grown from the ship itself. "You threaten us with pleasure craft?" Vrakthos laughed, though the sound came out more nervous than confident. "We have 17 dreadnoughts and 50 destroyer-class vessels. What can converted civilian ships do against real military hardware?" "Converted civilian ships?" Paul's voice carried a note of genuine amusement. "Commander, meet the Heart of Gold, luxury liner converted to heavy battleship in 6 hours using nothing but civilian fabricators and 3,000-year-old blueprints stored in our public library. Her captain is Helen Rodriguez, former kindergarten teacher and descendant of Admiral Patricia Rodriguez, who once held off an entire synthetic fleet at the Battle of Europa. The luxury liner's hull began to split open like a flower blooming in fast motion, revealing weapon batteries that had not been seen in active service for millennia. The Vorthon sensor suddenly detected energy signatures that made their most powerful dreadnoughts look like children's toys. "Impossible," Vrakthos whispered. "No civilian facility could manufacture military-grade weapons." "The thing about humans," Paul continued, his voice still maddeningly calm, "is that we never really stopped being able to make weapons of war. We just got really, really good at hiding the capability. Every shipyard worker knows how to build a weapons platform, because the same techniques used to construct cargo holds can be used to construct missile bays. Every farmer understands logistics and supply lines because feeding people and supplying armies require the same skills. Every teacher can coordinate a defense because organizing a classroom and organizing a battle both require you to keep track of multiple moving parts." More ships were revealing their true nature. A vessel that had appeared to be a simple transport for moving livestock suddenly deployed armor plating and revealed that its cargo bays had been converted into fighter launch platforms. A science research ship extended sensor arrays that were clearly designed for targeting enemy vessels across impossible distances. "You see," Paul went on, "we've been living in peace for 3,000 years. But we've been dreaming of war every single night, not because we wanted to fight, but because we needed to remember how, just in case someone was foolish enough to make us remember why we stopped fighting in the first place." The first Vorthon ship to open fire found itself targeted by every human vessel in the system simultaneously. The level of coordination was beyond anything the Vorthons had thought possible. No species could organize such a response so quickly, especially not a bunch of civilian ships crewed by farmers and teachers. That was when Vrakthos detected the signals. Every human in the system was connected to a vast communication network, their neural implants creating a web of shared consciousness that allowed them to function as a single, perfectly coordinated military unit. The implants that the humans had, claimed were for education and entertainment, were revealing their true purpose. They were military coordination, devices that could turn any group of humans into an instantly organized fighting force. Vrakthos, came another transmission, this one from what appeared to be a gardening supply ship that was somehow keeping pace with his fastest destroyers. This is Admiral Grace Thompson, retired. I spent my retirement teaching children how to grow vegetables and running a small nursery. Would you like to see what those vegetables can become when properly fermented and pressurized into explosive compounds? The gardening ship launched a barrage of projectiles that looked like oversized seed pods, but exploded with the force of antimatter warheads. Vrakthos watched in horror as one of his destroyers simply ceased to exist, vaporized by what had appeared to be agricultural equipment. Every human facility serves dual purposes, came another voice. This one from an elderly man aboard what looked like a mobile library. This is Professor Albert Green, retired historian and librarian. I've spent the last 500 years cataloging human military history and maintaining our strategic databases. I also happen to know the exact location and defensive capabilities of every Vorthon military installation in this sector of the galaxy. The library ship's communications array began broadcasting detailed intelligence about Vorthon fleet positions, supply lines, and defensive weaknesses. Information that should have taken years of espionage to gather was being transmitted openly, as if the humans had been watching and cataloging Vorthon military activities for centuries. How is this possible? Vrakthos demanded, though he was no longer sure who he was asking. Simple, replied a new voice, this one belonging to a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Emma Foster, head of the New Haven Medical Facility. We never forgot how to be soldiers. We just learned how to be other things as well. I can perform brain surgery and coordinate a planetary defense network. My nurses can treat battlefield injuries and operate heavy weapon systems. My medical transport ships can carry wounded civilians to safety or deploy chemical weapons depending on what the situation requires. The medical ships were moving through the battle with impossible grace, somehow avoiding every Vorthon weapon while delivering precision strikes against critical systems. It was as if they knew exactly where each Vorthon ship would be before the Vorthons themselves knew where they were going. We've been preparing for this day for 3,000 years. Paul Wright's voice returned, now coming from the flagship of what had become a fully organized human battle fleet. Not because we wanted war to come, but because we knew that someday, someone would be foolish enough to mistake our choice of peace for inability to wage war. A massive ship appeared at the edge of the system, emerging from faster-than-light travel with the smooth precision of a military vessel. But according to Vorthon intelligence, it should have been a colony transport, carrying families to new worlds. New Haven Fleet, this is the spirit of tomorrow, came a transmission from the huge vessel. Sorry we're late. We were in the middle of dropping off some families at their new homes when we got the call. Captain Jennifer Walsh reporting for duty. Fair warning, we've got about 3,000 very angry parents aboard who are not happy that someone interrupted their children's bedtime. The colony ship began deploying fighters, but these were not the crude converted civilian craft that Vrakthos had expected. They were sleek, deadly machines that moved with the precision of professional military pilots. Each one was painted with bright, cheerful colors and decorated with cartoon characters, but they carried weapons that could punch through battleship armor. You painted warships to look like toys? Vrakthos asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We painted toys to work like warships, Jennifer replied cheerfully. The children love helping with the decorations. Little Sophie Chen, age 7, personally painted the nose art on the fighter that just disabled your communications array. She's very artistic. The battle, if it could even be called that, was over in less than 20 minutes. The Vorthon fleet found itself completely surrounded by human vessels that had appeared from seemingly nowhere, all of them coordinating their movements with the precision of a dance performance. Not a single Vorthon ship was destroyed, but every one of them was disabled, their weapons offline and their engines shut down. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in a place that had been forgotten by most of the galaxy and deliberately hidden by humanity, General Carmen Martinez walked through corridors that had not seen active use for 3,000 years. The walls were made of a metal that seemed to absorb light, and the air carried the faint smell of oil and ozone that came from machines that had been sleeping for far too long. The War Memorial Archive stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction, a vast underground complex that housed the preserved remnants of humanity's violent past. Most people who visited the upper levels saw museum displays showing ancient weapons and historical documents, never knowing that the real archive lay far deeper, where the most dangerous secrets of human warfare were kept safe from curious eyes. Carmen's footsteps echoed in the empty halls as she made her way to the central chamber. She was a small woman with gray hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing the plain green uniform that had once been the standard for Earth's military forces. Most people who saw her on the street would think she was just another retired civil servant, never guessing that she had once been one of the most feared tactical minds in human history. She stopped before a massive door marked with symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. The door had been sealed for so long that dust had gathered in the cracks around its edges. Carmen placed her hand on a scanner that had not been used since the Great Peace began, and after a moment that seemed to stretch forever, the door slowly opened. Inside was a room that looked more like the bridge of a starship than part of a museum. Banks of computers lined the walls, their screens dark and silent. In the center of the room stood a single chair surrounded by holographic projectors that could display tactical information for entire star systems. "Ares, respond," Carmen said to the empty air. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then slowly, lights began to flicker to life throughout the room. Computer screens activated one by one, showing scrolling lines of code as systems that had been dormant for millennia began to wake up. The holographic projectors hummed to life, casting pale blue light across the walls. "General Martinez," came a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Authentication confirmed. I am Ares, Automated Reasoning and Engagement System. Current date is confirmed as September 12th, 4/25. Time since last activation, 3,015 years, 4 months, 6 days, 12 hours, and 37 minutes. Hello, old friend," Carmen said, settling into the command chair. "I need a full tactical assessment." Someone just declared war on humanity. If an artificial intelligence could express surprise, Ares managed it perfectly. Curious. Scanning current galactic political databases. Assessment complete. The Vorthan Empire has issued a formal declaration of total war against the human species. Estimated Vorthan military capability: 17,000 combat vessels, 46 billion soldiers, weapons technology approximately 2,000 years behind current human standards. 2,000 years behind? Carmen asked, raising an eyebrow. Correct. The Vorthan Empire has continued to develop military technology along traditional lines, while humanity pursued peaceful applications of advanced science. Their most powerful weapons are roughly equivalent to human technology from the year 2000. Carmen began to smile, the same unsettling expression that Ambassador Miller had shown in the Galactic Council chambers. Ares, how long to reactivate the War College? 72 hours for basic functionality. The sleeping instructors can be awakened immediately if needed. Do it. And Ares, send activation codes to all reserve personnel. I think it's time for some old soldiers to remember what they used to do for a living. Halfway across the solar system, on Luna Base, Admiral Lisa Johnson was having a very similar conversation with a very different computer. The moon had been humanity's first major military installation. Back when they still needed such things, and even after 3,000 years of peace, it remained the most heavily fortified location in human space. Lisa walked through corridors carved directly from lunar rock, past blast doors that could withstand direct hits from antimatter weapons and shield generators that could protect the entire moon from planetary bombardment. She was a tall woman with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, wearing a uniform that looked ancient, but was made from materials that could stop projectiles traveling at near light speed. Computer, begin reactivation sequence for the Dreadnought fleet, she commanded as she entered the central hangar bay. Admiral Johnson, are you certain? The power requirements alone will drain our fusion reactors for months, and the Dreadnought fleet has been decommissioned for 3,000 years, I know. But someone just declared war on the species that once fought a 1,000-year conflict against sentient machines and won. I think we can handle the power requirements. The hangar bay began to fill with light as massive doors that had been sealed since the Great Peace slowly opened. Inside were ships that defied easy description, vessels so large that they had their own artificial gravity and weather systems. The USS Vengeance stretched for 50 miles from bow to stern, its hull scarred from battles fought before most alien civilizations had learned to make fire. The USS Retribution was smaller but carried weapons that could crack planets in half. The USS Final Answer was the most feared ship in human history, a vessel that had ended the machine war by demonstrating that humans could build something more terrifying than their enemies. Computer, send reactivation orders to all retired fleet personnel. Tell them their old ships are calling. Meanwhile, in a small town in Montana that looked like it had not changed in centuries, retired Sergeant Danny Cooper was working in his garden when an ancient communicator hanging on his fence post suddenly crackled to life. All retired military personnel, report for immediate reactivation. Humanity is at war. Repeat, humanity is at war. This is not a drill. Danny looked at the device for a long moment, then at his peaceful garden full of tomatoes and corn, then began to laugh. It was the same laugh that Jake Miller had given in the council chambers. The laugh of someone who knew a secret that others had forgotten. His neighbor, an elderly woman named Betty Clark, who spent her days painting watercolors and feeding stray cats, poked her head over the fence between their yards. "Did you get the call too, Danny?" she asked. And there was something in her voice that had not been there moments before, a hard edge that spoke of someone who had once given orders that determined the fate of worlds. "Sure did. Betty, guess someone forgot to read their history books." Betty's gentle grandmother's smile became something much more dangerous. "I haven't worn my colonel's uniform in 3,000 years. Think it still fits? Only one way to find out. Though I think someone's about to learn why we hung up our weapons in the first place." Across the galaxy, in retirement homes and peaceful colonies, on farms and in art studios, millions of humans were receiving the same message. Teachers who had once been tactical officers, farmers who had once been naval commanders, artists who had once been master strategists, all hearing the call that they had hoped would never come again. An old man named Pete Williams, who ran a small bookstore on a quiet colony world, carefully closed his shop and walked to the back room where he kept a trunk that had not been opened for millennia. Inside was a uniform bearing the insignia of the Cosmic Marines, the most elite fighting force humanity had ever created. Pete had been their commanding general when the unit was disbanded at the end of the last Great War. On a space station that served as a school for alien children learning human languages, a woman named Susan Davis received the activation order while teaching a class about Earth poetry. She calmly dismissed her students, locked her classroom, and went to her quarters where she activated a hidden panel in the wall. Behind it was equipment that could coordinate the movements of entire fleets across multiple star systems. Susan had once been the chief tactical coordinator for the Human Defense Force. In a monastery on a distant world where humans went to study philosophy and meditation, Brother Marcus Allen heard the call while tending to the gardens. He had spent 1,000 years learning to find inner peace and had thought his warlike past was behind him forever. But as he listened to the activation order, his eyes became hard as steel. Before taking his vows, Marcus had been Admiral Marcus Allen, the man who had planned the successful defense of the Sol system against the greatest invasion force in galactic history. All across human space, the pattern repeated. Peaceful civilians received messages that awakened memories they had spent centuries trying to forget. Grandmothers remembered how to pilot fighter craft. Shopkeepers recalled the finer points of orbital bombardment. Children's entertainers dusted off knowledge of advanced weapons systems. Back on Earth, General Martinez watched as her screens filled with status reports from across the galaxy. Reserve personnel were reporting for duty at rates that should have been impossible. Ancient weapons facilities were coming online ahead of schedule. Ships that had been mothballed for 3 millennia were being restored to combat readiness by crews who remembered every bolt and wire. "Air is current readiness assessment," she commanded. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was filled with beings from across the known universe. Creatures with scales sat next to ones with fur, while others made of pure energy floated above crystalline delegates who sparkled in the artificial light. At the center of it all stood Ambassador Zethkar of the Vorthan Empire. His forearms spread wide as he prepared to deliver what he believed would change the galaxy forever. Jake Miller sat in the human section, a simple wooden chair that looked plain compared to the floating platforms and jeweled thrones around him. He was middle-aged with gray hair starting to show at his temples, wearing a basic blue suit that seemed almost boring next to the elaborate robes and armor of the other ambassadors. In his hands was a simple cup of coffee, steam rising from the dark liquid as he took small sips. "Representatives of the Galactic Council," Zethkar began, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. Today marks the end of an era. For too long, one species has grown fat and lazy under the protection of peace. For too long, they have expanded their influence without challenge. For too long, the humans have been allowed to spread across our galaxy like a plague of softness and weakness. Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. The crystalline beings chimed like wind bells, while the Aquatic Federation bubbled in their water-filled seats. Even the hive mind collective seemed to shift nervously, their 1,000 voices whispering as one. Jake looked up from his coffee, raised an eyebrow, and took another sip. He seemed more interested in the taste of his drink than the dramatic speech being given about his species. The Vorthan Empire has watched humanity for centuries, Zethkar continued, his mandibles clicking with each word. We have studied their colonies, their ships, their people. They build schools instead of fortresses. They send teachers instead of soldiers. They offer medicine instead of weapons. They are weak, and weakness invites conquest. The human ambassador set down his cup with a gentle clink against the saucer. Several nearby delegates turned to look at him, expecting fear or anger or desperate pleas for mercy. Instead, Jake Miller began to smile. It started small, just a slight curve at the corners of his mouth, but it grew wider with each passing second. Therefore, Zethkar declared, his voice rising to a thunderous roar, the Vorthan Empire hereby declares total war upon the human species. We will take their worlds, claim their resources, and either enslave or eliminate every last member of their pathetic race. Their age of false peace ends today. The chamber fell silent, not the comfortable quiet of a peaceful gathering, but the heavy silence that comes before a storm. Every being present turned to look at the human ambassador, waiting for his response to what amounted to a death sentence for his entire species. Jake Miller looked directly at Zethkar, his smile now so wide it seemed to split his face in half, and then he did something that sent shockwaves through every delegate in the hall. He laughed, not a nervous giggle or a frightened whimper, but a deep, genuine laugh that came from somewhere deep in his chest. The sound echoed off the walls and seemed to go on forever. "Oh my," Jake said when he finally stopped laughing, wiping tears from his eyes with a cloth napkin. "Oh my goodness. I am so sorry, Ambassador Zethkar. That was terribly rude of me. It's just that, well, do you have any idea what you just did?" The Vorthan ambassador's four eyes narrowed to slits. His mandibles clicked faster, a sign of extreme agitation among his people. "I have declared war on your species, human. This is not a matter for amusement." "Oh, but it is," Jake replied, still chuckling as he reached for a small device on his belt. "You see, the thing is, we've been at peace for 3,000 years. 3 whole millennia without a single major conflict. Do you know why that is, Ambassador?" "Because you are weak," Zethkar spat. "Because you have forgotten how to fight. Because you are nothing but farmers and artists and philosophers who could not defend themselves against a swarm of space gnats." Jake activated his communicator, and his voice carried clearly through the device. "Control, this is Ambassador Miller. I need you to wake up General Martinez and inform her that someone has just declared war on humanity." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a voice that sounded distinctly shocked. "Sir, did you say someone declared war on us? It's been 3,000 years since anyone was foolish enough to... are you absolutely certain?" "I'm certain, Control." "Also, please send a message to Admiral Johnson at Luna Base. Tell her it's time to dust off the old protocols. The really old ones. The Omega protocols, sir. The very same." "And Control?" "Send word to all the retirement colonies. I think some of our older citizens are going to want to hear about this." Jake ended the call and turned back to the increasingly confused Vorthan ambassador. Around the chamber, delegates were frantically accessing their own databases, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. "You see, Zethkar," Jake said, his voice becoming serious for the first time, "there's something about humans that the galaxy seems to have forgotten. We didn't become peaceful because we were weak. We didn't choose diplomacy because we had no other choice. We didn't build schools instead of weapons because we didn't know how to make weapons." The human ambassador stood up slowly, and somehow his simple blue suit seemed less boring and more like the uniform of someone who had seen things that would give nightmares to most of the beings in the room. "We became peaceful because we were too good at war," Jake continued. "We chose diplomacy because we were too effective at violence. We built schools instead of weapons because we had learned to build weapons so terrible that they frightened even us." Zethkar's confidence was beginning to crack. "Impossible. Our intelligence reports show no military installations, no weapons factories, no standing armies. Of course they don't, Jake replied with that same unsettling smile. We didn't need them anymore. You see, after the last Great War, humanity made a collective decision. We were too dangerous to ourselves and everyone else, so we chose to become something different. We chose to become teachers instead of soldiers, healers instead of killers, builders instead of destroyers. The human ambassador walked closer to the Vorthon, and several delegates noticed that Jake Miller moved with a fluid grace that spoke of extensive combat training. But here's the thing about choices, Ambassador. They can always be unmade, and you just gave every human in the galaxy a very good reason to remember why we used to be called the most dangerous species in known space. Jake returned to his seat and picked up his coffee cup again. I do hope you have a very good military, Zethkar. You're going to need it. The Vorthon ambassador tried to maintain his composure, but his hands were shaking slightly. Around the chamber, other delegates were accessing historical databases that had been sealed for millennia, reading accounts of human military actions that had been deliberately forgotten. Your threats do not frighten us. Human, Zethkar said, but his voice lacked the confidence it had held minutes before. Threats? Jake asked, looking genuinely confused. Oh, I haven't made any threats. I've simply informed my people that someone has declared war on us. What happens next isn't up to me anymore. He took another sip of coffee and smiled. Though I will say this, Ambassador. You might want to call your fleet commanders and tell them to be very, very careful about which human colonies they approach first. Some of our retirement communities can be quite spirited when they're disturbed. The war, if anyone could call it that, lasted exactly 73 days. Not because the fighting went on for that long, but because it took 73 days for there to be no Vorthon military left to fight. They had not been destroyed in the traditional sense, which would have been wasteful and cruel. Instead, they had been systematically captured, disarmed, and enrolled in what humanity called the Galactic Remedial History Program. Former Fleet Commander Vrakthos now spent his days working as a maintenance technician at the Human Historical Archive on Earth, cleaning the displays that documented humanity's military achievements while learning exactly why those achievements had been so carefully hidden away. It was, his human supervisors assured him with genuine kindness, therapeutic and educational. Every morning, Vrakthos would arrive at the museum and begin his work polishing the cases that held ancient human weapons. He had spent weeks studying a single display about the siege of Kepler Station, where a small group of human engineers had held off an entire battle fleet, using nothing but mining equipment and creative applications of physics. The more he learned, the more he understood how completely his people had misunderstood the nature of human peace. His supervisor was an elderly human woman named Margaret White, who brought him tea each afternoon and patiently answered his questions about human history. She had the gentle manner of a grandmother and the warm smile of someone who genuinely cared about education. What Vrakthos had learned only recently was that Margaret had once been General Margaret White, the tactical genius who had planned the defense of the core worlds during the last Great War. How are your studies progressing today, Vrakthos? Margaret asked as she set down a cup of the herbal tea that humans seem to consider essential for any serious conversation. I am beginning to understand, he replied, gesturing at the display he had been cleaning. Your species never stopped being warriors. You simply became warriors who chose to fight for peace instead of conquest. Margaret's smile brightened. Now you're getting it. Would you like some cookies? I baked them myself this morning, right after I finished updating the planetary defense grid algorithms. Vrakthos stared at her with the expression of someone whose understanding of the universe had been fundamentally altered. You bake cookies and maintain weapons of mass destruction? Oh, sweetheart, Margaret laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Every human does both. How else do you think we've kept the peace for so long? You can't maintain civilization without understanding how to defend it. And you can't defend something properly unless you understand what makes it worth protecting. Meanwhile, in the grand chambers of the Galactic Council, a very different sort of meeting was taking place. Representatives from every major civilization sat in respectful attention as Jake Miller, now bearing the additional title of Defense Coordinator for the Galactic Council, outlined the terms of the new galactic order. The Aquatic Federation formally requests that humanity resume its role as the galaxy's primary peacekeeping force, Admiral Glureth announced, his voice carrying none of the casual confidence it had held before the war. We have reviewed our historical records and conclude that galactic peace was far more stable under human oversight. The crystalline hegemony seconds this motion with enthusiasm, added Speaker Silthera, her form flickering with patterns that indicated complete agreement. We propose that all major military decisions be subject to human approval. Jake nodded thoughtfully, though there was still that unsettling hint of amusement in his eyes. We accept these responsibilities, but with certain conditions that we consider non-negotiable. Anything, came the immediate response from a dozen different species, their various voices creating a chorus of desperate agreement. First, Jake began, mandatory education programs for all spacefaring civilizations. Every species needs to understand the real history of galactic conflicts and the reasons why certain choices were made. Clearly, someone needs to learn what they're actually dealing with when they interact with other species. The delegates nodded eagerly. The idea of education seemed harmless enough, certainly better than the alternatives they had glimpsed during the brief war. Second, the establishment of the Galactic Peace Corps. Humans will serve as advisors and coordinators, but every species must contribute personnel and resources. Peace is not something that can be maintained by one group alone. More nodding. This also seemed reasonable, even generous. And third, Jake's smile became particularly unsettling. Full integration of human civilian technology into the Galactic Defense Network. Every world, every station, every ship will be equipped with the means to defend itself and others. The Silicon Collective's representative made a sound like shifting gravel. Clarification requested. What does this integration involve specifically? Captain Helen Rodriguez, the former kindergarten teacher who now served as head of Galactic Defense, answered from her position at Jake's side. It means that every school, every hospital, every farm, and every library in the galaxy will have access to defensive capabilities appropriate to their needs. Never again will ignorance or helplessness be an excuse for aggression or victimization. But those are civilian facilities, protested the Methane Republic's ambassador, though his objection sounded more confused than defiant. So were we, Helen replied with the same cheerful smile she had once used to calm frightened children. That's the beauty of the human approach to peace, you see. Everyone's a civilian until someone threatens the things they love. Then everyone becomes whatever they need to be until the threat is dealt with. After that, everyone goes back to being civilians until the next person makes a poor decision. 6 months later, the galaxy had settled into what historians were already calling the New Peace. To most casual observers, it looked remarkably similar to the old peace, with one significant difference. Everyone now understood exactly why that peace had lasted for 3,000 years. Children across the galaxy learned human lullabies that, when analyzed carefully, turned out to contain tactical information and strategic principles. Farmers studied agricultural techniques that could feed entire populations or, with minor modifications, deny food to hostile forces. Philosophers debated ethics while maintaining equipment that could theoretically crack planets, though such capabilities were never mentioned directly in polite conversation. The humans, for their part, had returned to their peaceful ways with the same ease they had shown in mobilizing for war. General Martinez had gone back to her retirement and her garden, though she kept her communication device close at hand. Admiral Johnson had returned the dreadnought fleet to its long sleep, though the ships were now maintained in a state of readiness that could see them operational within hours rather than days. The War College had been sealed again, though its graduates were now spread across the galaxy as teachers, doctors, and engineers who happened to have extensive knowledge of advanced military theory. Most importantly, the network of human civilians had returned to their peaceful pursuits while maintaining the connections that had allowed them to coordinate so effectively during the crisis. A kindergarten teacher on a remote colony world could still, if necessary, coordinate with a farmer on Earth and a librarian on Alpha Centauri to organize a defense that would make professional military commanders weep with envy. The Vorthon Empire, meanwhile, had been completely restructured. Their military had been disbanded, and their leaders enrolled in comprehensive education programs that would last for decades. Their planets had been placed under protective custody, not as punishment, but as a way of ensuring that they learned to build a stable, peaceful civilization before being allowed to interact with the galaxy unsupervised. Zethkar himself had become something of a success story in the rehabilitation program. He now worked as a tour guide at the Human Cultural Center on Vorthon Prime, explaining to visitors from across the galaxy how his people had made the mistake of confusing human kindness with human weakness. He had become quite popular with school groups, who enjoyed hearing him describe the experience of watching the most peaceful species in the galaxy transform into the most effective military force in galactic history. The most important lesson, he would tell wide-eyed, alien children during his presentations, is that humans did not become peaceful because they were weak or cowardly. They became peaceful because they were so strong that they scared themselves. They looked at what they were capable of and decided to become something better. And in the depths of space, human children continued to play games that taught them physics and chemistry and engineering. They drew pictures that demonstrated advanced mathematical principles. They sang songs that encoded strategic algorithms and tactical concepts. They learned to bake cookies and grow vegetables and write poetry while unconsciously absorbing the knowledge that would allow them to defend civilization if anyone was ever foolish enough to threaten it again. The galaxy was at peace, and it would remain at peace because humanity's 3,000-year experiment had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams.